everything in the vicinity was closed, and that this framing is purposeful rather than merely incorrect. It wasn't an event when the evening began, but he suggested Ruth's Chris, the first coincidence, which Funky does not think is a coincidence at all, is that Mendeecees enters the room with a partner as soon as he arrives, and that information immediately undermines Tamar's later emotional attachment to it. Funky doesn't make any charges or dramatize it. He just says, "I didn't play it in this interview. But at the moment in which you went in this interview with L'Oreal, you indicated that you were at home with David or someone else when they said, 'We need to call the ambulance.' On the internet, you claimed that you nearly died after waking up in a pool of blood, and you were like, 'No.'" He merely notes that this wasn't the first time that Mendeecees has shown up out of the blue at other get-togethers. One unexpected appearance could be the product of chance. And one observation is enough to change the temperature, because repetition reduces belief. The night splinters into motion after 3 starts to resemble a pattern, and Funky lets viewers do that computation independently. Plans change, exhaustion sets in, and the gang decides to proceed to sauce and buckhead first. Then to V12, despite Funky's wish to go back home because it makes a decision. Even that shift is noteworthy. It's clear that Funky Man has survived kissing in the "I didn't walk upstairs when we were dropped off at Tamar's house because I assumed they wanted to be up there alone in the back of that stupid car. You were sitting on his lap in that goddamn Uber and your ass was kissing. All right, that made me really uncomfortable, so I got in my stupid car and drove home. He was a unique driver, therefore he didn't want to continue. The reroute was difficult because they were the ones that went upstairs. He was asked to get out of his car and go with them, but I'm not sure if they were your ass from behind and ran your head by him." When Funky talks about being told to get out of his car and go somewhere else. There's control in this situation, but it doesn't matter on its own. The scenario Tamar described about casually arriving home and losing consciousness begins to seem contrived rather than spontaneous, as Funky, someone directing the night's path, someone ensuring their clothes, says it. His explanation of discomfort is incremental rather than startling. He freely admits that he never felt comfortable in their connection and describes how he often saw Tamar and Mendeecees together in settings where boundaries were blurred, like at restaurants or during a music video shoot. Again, he doesn't level accusations. Instead, he produces catalogs. It was due to what he observed in front of him, not rumors. By the time they get in the car and head back to Tamar's apartment, attention has already peaked, and Funky doesn't say anything or embellish. In one awful comment, Funky reveals that he didn't go upstairs because Tamar and Mendeecees were kissing in the car. At that time, everything is reoriented because Funky's desertion of a friend had been the focus of public discourse up until that point. It was unclear if his absence indicated negligence or if he was unable to keep her safe. But his logic totally flips the narrative. He didn't go because he wasn't worried. He left because he believed they desired seclusion. This belief is important because it also contrasts sharply with Tamar's later portrayal of confusion and isolation. Funky's story highlights one important point. Tamar wasn't alone. The image comes to mind when he says she was sitting on Mendeecees' lap in the Uber, not emotionally, not socially, and not physically, he said, since it's specific. Viewers fight over whether it could coexist with the claim that they were ignorant of what happened following, rather than if it is suitable. At that point, the internet conversation begins to disintegrate. Instead, then focusing on whether Funky hurts Tamar, commenters start asking who else was present and why their presence hasn't been addressed. Funky is careful not to discuss what happened upstairs. But let's talk about who went. Funky says that Mendeecees and his friend went upstairs, and the rest of the conversation centers on that accusation since Tamar then brings up blood, damage, and a refusal to contact an ambulance. It develops proximity at that same instant. Rather than mocking their claims, Funky goes back and challenges their consistency. He recalls Tamar saying she almost died when she woke up in a pool of blood. But he compares that with her admission that she was told to call medical services but chose not to. Funky questions Tamar about turning down an ambulance after claiming she was on the verge of death. This does not imply that nothing happened. but rather that the person who experienced it did not treat it as an emergency. Additionally, the internet begins to add meanings to this section of the monologue when it goes viral, because Tamar leaves it open rather than because Funky develops it. Viewers point out the gaps, the injury's incapacity to be articulated, and Funky's later reference to the healing process. Tamar's description was vague, while Funky's was accurate. And in that emptiness, concepts emerge not as realities, but as attempts to deal with cognitive dissonance. This is where the title's terminology begins to take shape in public contexts. Not from the transcript itself, but from how others respond to it. Health tests, rumored reports, and worst case. Tests, rumored reports, and worst case. Unnecessary crisis and fragility. In an environment already heightened by Funky's story, that ambiguity becomes explosive. Commenters begin to revisit her wording, highlighting the fact scenarios are frequently mentioned in comment sections and reposts as claims rather than confirmations. Funky never makes those claims, but his painstaking restoration gives them a surface to stick on. It moves toward Yandy, indicating that Tamar is not the only one under pressure. Close to the Funky mentions her only at the end of his story, but he does it in a subtle way. Funky asserts that Yandy was the only one hurt, and a single remark opens another line of inquiry because someone nearby silence begins to resemble containment rather than dignity. And Yandy would have crossed a boundary if she had been wronged. If that barrier had been crossed on a night of secrecy, diverted plans. And Section 1 ends with the disintegration of certainty. Funky makes no criminal allegations. Serious injuries, unexplained injuries. He doesn't verify tests. He doesn't describe what happened upstairs. He decides who is present, who left, and who later claimed in addition once such coordinates are determined. The story is part of the gaps and no longer belongs to any one person, making it difficult to determine which is much more unstable. Tone and delivery are no longer grounds of disagreement among viewers once. Funky has completed identifying who is present and when. Instead, the conversation turns from being about emotion to being about exposure. Disparities, they weren't new. Rather, same unsolved problems tamed. Now portrayed in a more unfavorable light. I don't know admitted, describing the wounds and blood in public. Used to call emergency service to do with that. Won't let such details persist without consequences. At this point, the atmosphere surrounding Tamar's situation darkens not because of any new knowledge, but rather because nothing is made plain. Her interview revealed that she described the event as something that occurred to her rather than something she participated in. She described washing her face when she got home and then losing consciousness. The absence of a transition between those moments tells of itself. At that point, speculation appears as a response rather than an accusation. When someone publicly reveals a catastrophic injury without knowing what caused it, audiences fill the hole. Initially, they do this out of a desire for coherence rather than malice. Additionally, they construct coherence on their own when it isn't given. Funky's transcript appears in reaction videos. Abandoned videos and comment sections doesn't indicate test confirmation. Viewers sometimes qualify it with terms like allegedly, according to bloggers, and it is always portrayed as something heard, seen, or said somewhere else. Additionally, such phrases begin to retroactively to the period that Funky depicts. Pressure, not proof, and repetition adds credibility. Tamar doesn't explain the details of her injuries or explain the distinction between claiming you almost died and declining an invitation, which heightens the tension. Ambulance. She claims that she doesn't know what happened and doesn't explain why in front of others. Every omission creates space for interpretation. Furthermore, Funky's assertion that the story was authored changes the direction of that speculation. The internet is never kind to empty space. He says the distinction is crucial, but he doesn't say that tied her injuries. It indicates intention without specifying the outcome. And Audiences start looking for reason as soon as they deduce intention. At which point, Yandy's name stops being. The entire situation goes from injury to betrayal when Funky claims that she is the only one who has been hurt. Someone close to Yandy went too far if she was abused. If that line was crossed on the same night that Tamar later characterized as horrible. The two strands of health and secrecy become entwined. Supporters begin to speculate that Yandy is secretly aware of anything she knows. As the second begins to take hold, Yandy exposes every reference to a public declaration that indicates how viewers comprehend quiet. If the issue has been discussed in legal or protective contexts, such disclosure does not have to be made public in order to be deemed complete. Yandy's absence online as confinement rather than avoidance. Script shows people choosing what to say, what not to say, and when to back off, leading them to believe that the information being suppressed is for survival rather than the audience's benefit. And after that framework is in place, the word court appears not because Funky discusses court matters. He narrates the narrative in chronological order, but he presents a well-known idea. Testimony makes people uncomfortable. He explains decisions and repeats some sentences for accuracy rather than emphasis. Viewers note the cadence and compare it to comments made under duress for documentation rather than entertainment. Conjecture turns into imagined results. Commenters begin to ask whether legal counsel is involved. Is it wise to keep quiet? If certain terms are being deliberately avoided? All of this is speculative, but the transcript's tone supports it. He conveys to the listener the count will stand since he refuses to dramatize and retreat. Tamar's disease is no longer seen in a Hoover. Instead, it is taken into account together with liability, exposure, and potential profit. The health narrative's emphasis moves from sympathy to confinement, leaving viewers wondering why injuries are publicly discussed but their origins are kept a secret, and why clarity is only given in specific situations. The speculates rather than accuses, and it transforms the comment section into a trial. Why is emotion conveyed but detail withheld? Instead of charging Mendeecees of a crime, Funky places him at the center of proximity, which makes him the focus of attention in that fictional area. Presence becomes implication. The phrase court erupts changes from being literal to metaphorical at this moment. Relevance, not guilt, is also sufficient to attract attention. Timelines are divided down into threads, and it illustrates the moment when viewers start to prosecute the story instead of passively consuming it. Videos stopped some words. Users replayed parts of Funky's tone shifts, and Tamar's comments softened when deflection replaced assurance. It all boils down to one unresolved paradox: how someone may report a serious injury in public, but yet not knowing what caused it. And others are there. The longer that question is left unanswered, the less influence Tamar has over the plot. Instead of being her story, it becomes a collective investigation motivated by unresolved testimony rather than new proof. By the end of this stage, the story has shifted, and the question of whether Tamar was hurt is no longer pertinent. The question of whether Funky was untidy is no longer pertinent. What matters is why her narrative fails while his aligns so nicely. It's about what authenticity and because the is no longer. After that crash, they build them and wait for permission to pass judgment. They are so raucous that even the most peaceful groups are sucked into the chaos. At the conclusion of part 2, the narrative shifts its focus from what transpired to who can afford to keep quiet. By this point, the plot stops moving forward with new information and turns inward, with the viewer focusing on why certain topped it all rather than what was said. A Funky story, which has a rigid structure of presence, discomfort, and departure when the theatrics are removed. Tamar's story is, and the longer it is left unclear it gets, viewers begin to realize that Tamar in his speech. She doesn't say when the scenario changed. She doesn't name the people around her. She doesn't describe how she went from a friendly evening to what she subsequently described as a dreadful circumstance. Furthermore, the story she told appears to be willfully lacking, not because details are missing, but rather because those details appear to have been purposefully omitted. In an environment already primed by quirky detail, such a choice seems to be avoidance. The audience starts to map their intent. It is not depicted as malicious. It is portrayed as management. The room doesn't blow up right away. It tightens. Before continuing, he stops, but it's not a confident pause. Instead, it's the type where a person is deciding how much damage they can tolerate after speaking. His shoulders settle. His voice turns into quieter. Then he admits that he is unsure of how to respond. Do you know what actually occurred to you? No, I'm not. Or what are you able to discuss? I don't know what actually I can talk about it. Going back to Tamar, since what happens next isn't gossip. The missed that hesitancy as a warning. It's a correction. A few seconds before to Tamar uses uncertainty as a cover and at ease on camera, rather than responding with a denial or accusation. Tamar responds quietly and detachedly when asked if she is aware of what truly happened to her. On the scene, innocence is not heard. The internet. Funky hears something very different since it picks up on omissions. He responds quietly at first. It is in charge. He skips ahead, ignores parts of the conversation, and then turns to face the camera directly, not as a pundit, but as someone who is there and whose name is already